Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and the lectures that we're giving now over Hamilton's classic text Mythology. This is lecture number 4, part 1, chapter 3, and part 1, chapter 4 of Hamilton's Mythology. In chapter 3, we're going to be talking about how the world and mankind were created. That's what she calls her chapter. And in chapter 4, we're going to get some stories of the earliest heroes, as she calls them, beginning with some of the stories of Prometheus. We're going to hear a lot about Prometheus in this lecture. Before, however, we get into the lecture, let me remind you, if you haven't been following the earlier lectures, you want to go to learnstrong.net, find that folder that says Mythology, and then for sure I would say watch lecture number 1, which is our intro lecture, which kind of sets up our study. And then lecture number 2 will cover the major gods and goddesses that are outlined, and then in lecture 3, there we give a lecture on the two gods, Demeter and Dionysius. Now again, just to suggest, I recommend the way you use this lecture is first you do your own reading, your own annotation. Remember, we work at our 3 levels of reading. Level 1, what does the text say? Level 2, what does the text mean here? We subdivide themes, messages, and rhetoric, not what the poet says or the writer says, but how it's said. And then finally at level 3, we try to answer the question, how do I somehow relate to this information? At 3A, how do I relate to other texts and titles that I'm familiar with? And at 3B, finally, how do I relate this to myself personally? That's important because of our learning theory, which says we're constantly looking to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways, right? Let's turn now to chapter 3, how the world and mankind were created. This chapter is what we call cosmogonic myths. Now, that's just a fancy word that means origin myths. Where did we come from? We've said in other lectures that there's often a debate about whether this question about origins should even be asked at all. For example, we turn to the great American philosopher Ken Wilber and his classic text, Sex, Ecology, Spirituality. And in the opening pages of that volume, he even says it. Why is there something instead of nothing? He says many people will argue that you shouldn't even ask the question, what he calls the philosophy of oops, that is to say, we don't know and we shouldn't ask. Of course, the other argument is the one we'll be playing with. Make up a story, find a story that tries to explain the origins of everything. And of course, not just the world, but humans as well. The Greeks had some very interesting stories. Let's get into them now. We'll open with chapter 3 in Hamilton's Mythology with some words from Milton. First there was chaos, the vast, immeasurable abyss, outrageous as a sea, dark, wasteful, wild. These are Milton's words, Edith Hamilton says, although they're hard to track down their source. But they express with precision what the Greeks thought lay back of the very first beginning of things, long before the gods appeared. In the dim past, uncounted ages ago, there was only the formless confusion of chaos, brooded over by unbroken darkness. At last, but how no one ever tried to explain, 2 children were born to this shapeless nothingness. Night was the child of chaos, and so was Erebus, which is the unfathomable deep where death dwells. In the whole universe there was nothing else. All was black, empty, silent, endless. And then a marvel of marvels came to pass. In some mysterious way, from this horror of blank, boundless vacancy, the best of all things came into being. A great playwright, the comic poet Aristophanes, describes its coming in words often quoted. Quote, black-winged night, into the bosom of Erebus, dark and deep, laid a wind-born egg, and as the seasons rolled forth, sprang love, the longed-for, shining, with wings of gold. From darkness and from death, love was born, and with its birth, order, beauty began to banish blind confusion. Love created light with its companion, radiant day. Now, this is an interesting way to start. Let's go ahead and put it in our notes. I love that the first place that we go for the Greeks is the creation of love, and then love creates everything else. This will tell us something about the Greeks right from the very beginning, right? That they would consider love as one of the greatest things of all time. And then, of course, ultimately, earth is going to be born out of all of this. The poet Hesiod will, the first Greek who tried to explain this, will say it this way: Earth, the beautiful, rose up, broad-bosomed, she that is the steadfast base of all things. And fair earth first bore the starry heaven equal to herself, to cover her on all sides, and to be a home forever for the blessed God. So with the creation of earth, by the way, let's put it in our notes that for the Greeks, they will personify earth using the female pronoun she, right? And then, of course, everything about the earth is personified in these early stories. We'll even hear about our first creatures. The first creatures who had the appearance of life were the children of Mother Earth and Father Heaven, Gaia and Uranus. And from here then, we've got a series of stories. The Cyclops will be created, the wheel-eyed, because they have the single eye. Then we have the Titans, who are not purely destructive like the Cyclops will be. And then finally, Father Heaven will begin a contest with Titan, the great Titan son Kronos, and they fight. Now, it's significant to point out that in Greek cosmogonic stories, these early origin stories, fighting and warfare have a lot to do with these early stories. The giants will spring up from Father Heaven, and they also will spring up or be created the Urines, the Furies, which will punish sinners and the like. Kronos, of course, the Roman name is Saturn, becomes Lord of Universe with his sister queen Rhea, or Ops in Latin. Zeus, Jupiter then, Kronos' son, will rebel. And Zeus, concerned that his sons, he's been told, one of my children are going to try to rebel against me, Zeus begins to swallow each of his children as they are born. Rhea, his wife, will take Zeus and hide him and send him off to Crete, where he will grow up. And in his place, she puts a boulder or a rock and gives that wrapped up in garments to Zeus. Zeus, unknowing, will swallow the rock instead. And Zeus, who is child 6 in the line, then is saved, allowing Zeus to grow up, ultimately to go back and to fight against his father. He forces Kronos to puke up all of the children, which will help him later in his great war, in his great fight. But it also is significant because this stone is going to also be vomited up. And at Delphi, we are told that this stone then, Edith Hamilton will say it this way, to disgorge it along with the 5 other children, the rock was set up at Delphi, where eons later a great traveler, Pausanias by name, reports that he saw it about 180 AD, a stone of no great size, which the priests of Delphi anoint every day with oil. We should pause for a moment and just point out at 3a that in the history of the world, rocks often are given very special kinds of respect. Yes, and so here we see that example as well. The great war then ensues. Kronos and the Titans will fight against Zeus and his brothers and sisters. Out of this contest, Zeus will win, but he will win with the help of Prometheus, right? Son of the Titan Aphis. Prometheus is wise, and yet so he helps Zeus to win. Zeus then begins the punishment parts of our story. 2 that come to mind. Obviously, we'll get to Prometheus in a little bit. The other one is Prometheus' brother Atlas, who, because he fought alongside of Kronos, he is punished, and the punishment is that he will have to carry the world on his back. The rendering is like this: to bear on his back forever the cruel strength of the crushing world, and the vault of the sky upon his shoulders, the great pillar that holds apart the earth and heaven, a load not easy to be borne. Of course, we think about Ayn Rand's classic novel, Atlas Shrugged. What would happen if Atlas decided he didn't want to hold up the world anymore? There is one last monster that Zeus has to contend with called Typhon, and Zeus will strike him down. And then later the giants rebel, and Zeus also defeats them. Interestingly, in some storylines with Hercules' help. But still, after all of this, there are no humans, right? The world is pictured as a round disc divided up between ocean and land. You have different kinds of creations then that are outlined. I won't get into this because you can do this reading on your own with Hamilton. The Semiarians, the Hyperboreans, and finally the Ethiopians. These are all kind of a mysterious people, but they are not mankind as we know today, humankind, right? The story of men as we know and women as we know today will, in Edith Hamilton, kind of be reduced down to two possible lines or variants of story. The first story is the Prometheus story. So let's take a few notes here now. Prometheus, whose name means forethought, and his brother Epimetheus, whose name means afterthought. He's kind of scatterbrained and silly and kind of silly. There's going to be a creation of humans, right? And Epimetheus is kind of given the job of giving gifts to all the creation and the animals and everything. And Epimetheus gives all of the best gifts in our story to the animals, right? They're strong, they're fast, they're all these other kinds of things. And when it comes time finally for humans to be given a gift, he's basically run out, leaving Prometheus to have to take over. And what Prometheus does is two things of importance for your notes, right? Both of these, by the way, Zeus is going to be upset about. One, the first thing that Prometheus does is that he makes men, and this is men, by the way, not women. We'll get to women in a bit. He makes men upright, to walk upright like the gods. Now we immediately think, don't we, of Milton's Paradise Lost and the moment that Adam is born. The fact that he walks upright, of course, as we've said in other lectures, is a big dog deal to Milton, right? The other thing that Prometheus does is, of course, what he's most famously known for, and that is he will give fire, the gift of fire, to humans. Of course, think about that gift of fire. It has both a protective quality and, of course, a destructive quality, right? So, for example, fire is great. We can cook our food with it, but we can also fly airplanes into buildings and kill lots and lots of people, can't we? So, in other words, see, it's got both a positive and a negative component. So, Prometheus will then give to humans the great gift. The second creation of man story is a little bit different. In this story, the gods create men, and they do it through a series of creations. It's almost like trial and error of a kind, right? Where the first creation, they're made out of gold, and these all die out and end up living in another place after they die out. Then there's the silver men, and they also die out, but they don't get to go on living in this other place. Then there are the brass men, and by this point, men have kind of devolved to where finally they just end up destroying each other by their own hands. Finally, a fifth race made of iron are the humans of today. And the thing that will make this group so important is that they never are allowed to rest from toil and sorrow, is what Edith Hamilton calls it, right? And then each generation gets progressively worse with the promise that someday Zeus is going to end it all. The reason being that men worship power too much. Hamilton, ironically a woman, will then pause in this chapter and point out that to this point, we've only been talking about men. Now it's time to talk about the creation of women. Now we immediately at 3a have to remind ourselves that these stories about why women are the curse to all men are stories that are invented by, as Chaucer's wife of Bath will say in her prologue, in her famous prologue, of course these are all stories that are written by men, invented by men to explain why women are the curse to them. Well, we're going to get some of those curse stories as well in our Greek mythology, right? Zeus, in our storyline, will create women. The woman is created, though, as a punishment for what Prometheus has done. That is to say, giving fire to humans. Prometheus will actually fool Zeus, which is why Zeus is really going to punish him. And the way that he does it is he says, I'm going to offer you two gifts here for sacrifice. One is this really nice offering of all this great meat. But what Prometheus has done is he's just put a little bit of good meat on the top, and then underneath it's nothing but bones. And then on the other one, he's put this kind of grisly stuff on the top, but underneath it's the really good meat. Zeus is deceived, and he picks the one that he thinks is the good meat, but underneath are just the bones, which in our story explains why when the Greeks sacrifice to the gods, they keep the best meat for themselves and they give the crummy meat in their worship to Zeus. Okay, Zeus is mad about this, and because he's mad about this, he creates Pandora. Now the name Pandora means gift of all, and it's probably understood in some ways ironic, right? Edith Hamilton will call Pandora a beautiful disaster, a nature to do evil. There's of course a second story about Pandora that you're probably more familiar with. That one, of course, says Pandora isn't necessarily evil or bad, she's just curious, and this idea argues that women are inherently more curious than men, and it is her curiosity which ultimately leads to the problem. In this storyline, the gods actually will begin the story. Each of the gods are asked to put into a box, a chest, one misfortune, and so they do. Then this box is given to Pandora, and Pandora is sent to Prometheus' brother Epiphanes, who we've already said is he's a little bit not always the wisest, if you will. Prometheus tells his bro, you need to stay away from this Pandora woman, she's dangerous. Of course, Epiphanes is not interested in staying away from Pandora. Pandora will, out of curiosity, have to know what's inside of the box. So she opens the chest. Out comes, of course, all of the misfortunes which haunt humankind. She slams the top down, leaving only hope as the last thing inside of the box. Of course, the lesson of all this is don't mess with Zeus because he has a way to get you back, right? Now, his punishment on Prometheus is a very famous one, right? Prometheus is taken. He's put up on a rock in the mountains of the Caucasus, and there he is crucified to a high, piercing, headlong rock in adamant chains that none can break. And there forever shall the intolerable present grind you down, speaking of Prometheus. And he who will release you is not born. Such fruit you reap for your own man-loving ways. A god yourself, you did not dread God's, Zeus's anger, but gave to mortals honor not their due, and therefore you must guard this joyless rock. No rest, no sleep, no moment's respite. Groans shall your speech be, lamentation your only words. It is from here then that Prometheus is punished. But what is the Promethean character? Well, does he beg Zeus, please, please forgive me? No, not at all. In fact, in our story, he will in fact say, up yours to Zeus, and he'll say, I did it. I would do it 1,000 times over. That is to say, he will not back down from Zeus. Zeus knows that Prometheus is aware of a prophecy that someday a son of Zeus will in fact try to dethrone him. And so Zeus asks Prometheus for this information, and Prometheus says, I ain't telling you nothing. For this, the punishment is an eagle will eat out his blackened liver, is the usual translation here. Prometheus, of course, his body is bound, but his spirit is free. Now, Edith Hamilton will mention a couple of Prometheus Unbound stories. We think immediately of Shelley's classic poem drama, Prometheus Unbound, right? One version of this is that the centaur, Chiron, will actually be willing to die in Prometheus's place. He will sacrifice himself for Prometheus. It's not real clear as to exactly why Zeus allows this. Maybe it's because Charon is able to share with Zeus that secret about which son it is that's going to maybe someday jack you or whatever. In another version of this, it's actually Hercules who kills the eagle that eats at the liver of Prometheus and ultimately saves Prometheus, and Zeus, for whatever reason, allows that as well. Well, to finish, Prometheus, of course, is what? Well, a symbol. A symbol of what? Right, that don't tell me what to do, that iconoclastic kind of position that says, I do what I do and I'm not interested in somebody else telling me what to do. In the American Emersonian tradition of the Transcendentalists, it's what we would call the nonconformist, the self-reliant individual, right? Of course, we think of Shelley's great novel, Frankenstein. We've given a lecture on this. Remember that Mary Shelley will call, in fact, her novel not just Frankenstein, but her subtitle, often not understood, The Modern Prometheus, right? Well, we have one final creation myth that Edith Hamilton's going to share with us, that in fact, men are descended from a race of stone, okay? In the beginning of this story, sounding very much like the Epic of Gilgamesh story, and by extension, the biblical account of the book, the story of Noah and the flood, Zeus has had enough and will send a flood all over the world, right? Because men are so bad. And for 9 days and 9 nights, we're going to get rain, and only the top of Parnassus, the great mountain, is left. There, however, is a great wooden chest that comes floating to the top of Parnassus, and it's inside of this chest that we have 2 humans there, okay? A man and a woman. Deucalion is Prometheus' son, and Pyrrha is the daughter of Epiphanes, Prometheus' bro, and Pandora, right? Remember, Pandora got sent there. And the way this story works is Prometheus knew in advance that Zeus was going to send this flood, and so he builds this large wooden chest.